really encouraging words. And I know you guys will give him your undivided attention here in chapel and on Zoom today. Give him a big welcome. Back to the Ridge, Dr. Devin Lauder.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you guys for being able to have this opportunity to speak with you. I want to be mindful of your time. I know that you guys are running on a pretty tight schedule. And so I'll just start by saying this. Today, I just want to give you some things to talk about, things to think about. I remember those amazing days back in the dorm, having conversations about a number of different things that are going on in your lives and around the world. And so hopefully today, I just plant a couple of seeds for you guys to think about, to discuss, because I know your hearts are all built on making that place so much better. My life and my family were enriched by our time on the Ridge, and still remember fondly the relationships and the experiences that we had there. So I will always consider myself a McCallie man for the times and the relationship that we had. Before I go too far, I wanted to make sure that I gave a couple of shout outs here. I saw Coach Scholl jump on the call. I'm sure he's got a much more robust title now. But for me, he'll always be Coach Scholl. Love you and your mentorship, your love for the Ridge and the men there, and all you did for me. Mr. Burns, thank you for the opportunity and the vision to have this opportunity to share with the men on the Ridge, especially in a time of pandemic. Having time away from the classroom to focus on other things can be challenging as you prioritize, and I don't take that lightly. Coach Thomas, thank you for the ability to gather together and your mission and your heart for diversity and inclusion there on the Ridge. Lastly, two men that are your classmates. One of the stipulations, for lack of a better term, that I asked Coach Thomas was that I wanted to talk to you guys. I wanted, before I came before you as a group of seniors there in the chapel and as a community of students in the upper school, I wanted to know what was important to you. And so Mason Calhoun and Cameron Hayes took time out of their winter break to jump on a Zoom call with me a couple of weeks ago. You guys are in great shape with those leaders. Those men are thoughtful and caring and love the community there at McCallie, like so many of you do. And so I really appreciate their time and effort. As I mentioned, I wanted to just give you a couple of words of thought in my 20 minutes that I have here. And then hopefully that sparks some conversation, because we're living in difficult times. And so my question to you is, as we think about Black History Month and the celebration here in February as the month comes to an end, does it really matter? Is it something that's important? I'll ask a couple of rhetorical questions. Can you remember in the year that you were born who won the Super Bowl or who the Super Bowl MVP was that year? How about the person on social media with the most social media followers? Maybe you're considering things like, should we still have HBCUs? Do you even know what an HBCU is? Should we focus more on the past and learn from where we've come? Or should we look forward to the future with admiration and focus there? Does Black History Month do more harm than good? One of the things that I learned as a member of that community is all of these questions are important and all these questions have value. One of the things that I shared with Mason and Cameron is, as Mr. Dietrich mentioned before, I'm from Chattanooga. I was born and raised there. I lived there for most of my life, though I moved around the town a lot. And so I know from experience that there are two Chattanoogas. There is the Chattanooga that's outside of the walls and the gates of McCallie. And then there are ones within that hallowed space that you guys sit today. Actually, when I was younger, I lived not too far from campus, less than 5 blocks away from campus. And ironically, never knew that McCallie existed. I never ventured out of my community far enough to know the amazing possibilities that were just around the corner. And so as you think about, does it matter? Are these questions worthy? I wanted to give you a few examples of people who ask those same questions of themselves. Some of those people you are very familiar with, and some of these people I hope to introduce you to, and again, maybe spark some conversations. I recently read a book from from the Bible about a prophet in the 8th century BC who went to the people who were the richest, who were the smartest, who were the most advanced, and gave them a warning. These people felt like they were doing God's work. They felt like they were the ones who were going to usher in this new kingdom. They were a part of the people of Israel. And this prophet, his name was Amos, said, "How can two walk together lest they be on one accord?" And so as you think about the lens through which you want to answer the question, does it matter? I also want you to consider Amos's lament to the people of northern Israel. 8th century BC. How can two walk together lest they be on one accord? And so however you move forward, I think one of the most important things that you're being taught and shown there on the ridge is walking together on one accord is important. So here's a rhetorical question. Some of you may know the answers and say, yes, I would argue if I were a bet man, I would say most would not. Have you ever heard these names? And are you familiar with their story? How about Mary Walker or Homer Plessy? How about Crosby Stamps, Carter G. Woodson, or Martin King Jr.? Several decades ago, a famous historian was quoted as saying, "The social forces that define a historical conjecture create the opportunity for talented individuals to make themselves heard above others." I'll say it again. Manning Marable, famous researcher, once said, "The forces that define all historical conjecture create the opportunity for talented individuals to make themselves heard above others." The point I think Professor Marable was trying to make is, in difficult times, people who are talented individuals rise above the rest to make an indelible difference. So let's talk about these 5 people. Mary Walker is famous because she was one of the last living slaves in the state of Tennessee, actually in Chattanooga. She was born a slave and died in 2012 at the age of 121. The reason her life carries such significance today is because her only goal in life was to overcome some of the atrocities of the 15 years she lived her life as a slave. She wanted to be able to read. She wanted to have the opportunity specifically to be able to read the Bible. And so at the age of 116, she taught herself to read. And not only did she teach herself to read, but she took it upon herself to be an agent of change for others to help them read as well. And her legacy continues through the Mary Walker Foundation, which is founded there in Chattanooga. The next person that some of you may be familiar with is a man by the name of Homer Plessy. In the summer of 1892, this young man in Louisiana became part of a movement that would shift the landscape of race relations in America forever. Plessy, in his deliberate act of civil disobedience, sat in the whites-only section of the East Louisiana Railroad instead of the colored car in the train. For his willful disobedience to the social norms of America, Plessy was subsequently arrested. This set of events in 1892 gave way to the landmark Supreme Court case, Plessy versus Ferguson, which the Supreme Court passed with a 7-1 vote. The one dissenter in this vote in 1896 was the Supreme Court justice from the state of Kentucky, who just happened to be a former Civil War veteran. And in his dissent, he stated that the Constitution of the United States in 1896 should be colorblind. 2 years after the landmark case of Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, a man by the name of Crosby DeWitt Stamps was born in Winchester, Tennessee, not too far from McCallie's campus. Crosby DeWitt Stamps was born to sharecroppers whose grandparents were slaves, who would have an amazing rise and influence in the state of Tennessee that I want to go back to a little bit later. But I wanted to make mention of his life because not only was he born a sharecropper, he left depravity in this small rural town here in Tennessee and went on to experience one of the most wealthy, rich, and areas and time periods in African-American history in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You probably are familiar with a number of the documentaries coming out today chronicling Black Wall Street and the rise and fall of this amazing African-American community. Crosby DeWitt Stamps got a chance to not only experience the heights of the African-American community at his time, but also the lows as the son of a sharecropper. Carter G. Woodson, most of you may know, was one of the first African-Americans to graduate from Harvard University. In 1926, he began to advocate on behalf of African-American History Week because in his mind, he felt that the African-American culture was much more than a few individuals being risen above the rest, that there was a plethora of stories worthy of being told, not only here in America, but across the world. He specifically chose the month of February because at the time, the country had developed the situation that would allow them to celebrate both President Lincoln and Frederick Douglass's birthday. And so he felt like as the world was celebrating these iconic men of emancipation, that African-American History Week would be appropriate in the month of February. It wasn't until 1976 that President Ford made African-American History Month a nationally recognized event. The last person that I'll mention is probably the most popular and probably the one you've probably heard most about, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. One of the things that I think is interesting about his life is we know much about the civil rights movement and his life as a public intellectual and a civil rights leader. We don't know a whole lot, though, in terms of celebration about what brought him to that point. Recently, I read a book entitled The Seminarian, Martin Luther King Jr.'s Coming of Age. And in that book, a young man about the same age as you are, in 1944, at the age of 15, decided to leave school, to leave home, to leave the comforts of his community and start college. He left home in the comfort of his mom and his dad and embarked on this academic pursuit that would push him out of his norms and into a world that he had never imagined for himself. And so much like many of you who are sitting in the chapel right now, you left home. And the thing that I want you to remember is you didn't have to. Most of you left situations that had amazing school systems or schools that were closer to you that could have allowed you to be more in your comfort zone, but you chose to come to the Ridge. You chose to intentionally include yourself in a diverse community, in a community that was different from others. There aren't a whole lot of all-boys schools in the country anymore because you felt like, or your parents felt like, this was an opportunity that would enhance not only you, but your life as you move forward. Very similar to your journey. As I read The Seminarian about Dr. King's life as a student at Morehouse College and later in Chester, Pennsylvania at Crozer Theological Seminary, I witnessed what it was like for Dr. King at the young age of 18 or 19 to struggle with some of the same questions that you are answering today. Some of those same questions that I asked you before I started my talk. One of the close friends that were interviewed for the book made a striking comment that I think is worthy of remembering and mentioning to you today. He said, were it not for Dr. King's time away at Crozer Theological Seminary, there might well never have been the public intellectual that we know of as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I mentioned before that I was going to come back to Professor Crosby DeWitt Stamps. In 2015, I completed my dissertation on the leadership journey of Professor Stamps. One of his famous quotes from a former student says, "The times are swiftly changing. We must learn to change with the times." This was a man who in the late 1800s had a vision for his students. He began a school that started as a one-room schoolhouse with 3 students. And by the time the school closed in 1966, became a beacon for 5 counties. It was the only school for African-American students within a 5-county radius. He started the first public bus transit. He started opportunities for students to learn high levels of math and science. He even took students in the 1930s from this small rural African-American community to Washington, D.C. to see the Capitol. He had a vision for what he felt like was most important. And though most of us will never know his name or his legacy, his life became significant because what he did absolutely mattered. Not because it put him on a pedestal, but it created an opportunity for people far after he was gone to experience a life that they never would have imagined. So again, I'll ask you, does it matter? Should we focus on other things? Are conversations about race and diversity and inclusion worthy of our time? Or are they just a distraction that's meant to divide us? I think most of these five people would echo the sentiments of this famous American poem from the Harlem Renaissance. And the poem says, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar like sugary sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load." I think if Langston Hughes were here today, he would remind us that the weight of a dream deferred is much heavier than we ever could imagine. And I know from talking to your classmates that your dream is to change the world, to be agents of change in a world that's divided over political views or social views or cultural views or divided along socioeconomic lines. And the question for you is, does it matter? Will I go down as a Jeopardy theme show question, or will I be a person of significance like many of the people that I mentioned to you today? Though you may not know their names, their life and their legacy has changed the way you experience the world today. Had it not been for Homer Ferguson, you would never be sitting in a room that you are today with the people that you have beside you. I want to close with this quote because I think it sums up everything that is important about this moment for you in your life as McCallie men. And as I mentioned before, because of the relationships and the experiences that I've had, I will always consider myself a McCallie man. I think the most important thing about the motto of McCallie that says honor, truth, and duty is that it be lived out. And so I'll finish with this quote. In a world awash with information, celebrity, and clutter, and with many competing and contradictory ideas, it can be hard to find truth and to reflect on it. In a world with so many pressures to achieve and to get ahead, it can be hard to remain truthful. It's common in today's world to think that honor is outdated, a quaint notion of a simpler time. And it's common to think that the only duties we have are to ourselves, to our own happiness and success, to our own story. That, though, is not the McCallie way. We are uncommon. We are McCallie men. I leave you with the words of your headmaster because I think he sums up exactly what matters most. You matter and your classmates matter because you have chosen to take the hard road, to not allow your dreams or the dreams of your classmates to be deferred. And as I had the conversation with your classmates Cameron and Mason, I asked them if you were here speaking to your class, what would you want them to know? What would you want them to hear? What do you want them to say? And their response was, we want to be seen, we want to be known, and we want to be able to live out the notion of honor, truth, and duty. McCallie men, you are a special group, and you join a long blue line of special men. I ask you to focus your life and your pursuits on a life of significance, because as we often do, we shouldn't confuse activity with accomplishments. I would implore you to pursue the most noble and honorable accomplishments possible to make you and your community a much better place. Go Big Blue.
Very well deserved. Coach, thank you for a strong message, man. It's good to see you again. I refer to Devin as Dr. DeLauder, I should say now, as coach as well. We had wonderful times. And what I saw in him as a young man was a person who had such talent and passion and love and thoughtfulness for what he did. Saw a person for whom and for others, everything he touched got better. And he's a doer, and he really is one who focuses on accomplishments and not activities. He's a difference maker and always has been. So, Coach, I am so grateful for you to be here with us on this special day. And next time, I hope it can be in person.
Absolutely.
I really thank you, man. Guys, Dean Hopping has some cleanup stuff for the weekend. Appreciate you. Yeah. Good, yeah. Well, that's up to you guys. Keeps the caseload down. We'll figure it out. Dean Hopper.
Coach. Looking good, Coach DeLauder. Want to add my thanks. Dr. DeLauder's message this morning, really good to hear. Really appreciate his time and energy in doing that for us. Three quick, really quick things, I hope. First is a new club going public here, the Blue Think Club. If you enjoy having casual, thoughtful conversation about philosophical and political topics, this is the group for you. They will gather together to listen, discuss, and voice opinions on thought-provoking issues and ideas in American society. Reese Woodard, class of 23, is your man. Reach out to him for more information about that group. And from Coach McCord and Coach Marion, they are still looking for guys for crew. If you're interested in crew, particularly in the role of coxswain, you get to yell at guys who are rowing and steer the boats. Kind of a cool gig if you can get it. And then if you're also looking for an opportunity to christen the new multi-million-dollar crew facility and get out on the water this spring, which they're excited about getting to do shortly, we believe, reach out to Coach McCourt or Coach Marion. And last but not least, for you seniors who emailed into the Google form, through a great twist of cosmic justice, the numbers of guys who inquired and the numbers allowed in the reduced capacity gym tonight matched up almost perfectly. So be on the lookout for an email from me. If you have responded to that Google form, you are in, and we will get those details to you so that you have them to come to that game. You should bring your student ID to get in. The rest of you, we hope you'll join it through online media and watch that game and cheer on the Blue Tornado tonight. It's a busy weekend. There's a lot going on. Let's take care of each other and hustle to the next class. Seniors, have a good weekend.